I don't know about the rest of y'all, but it is hot over here in Durham, North Carolina. I went out there yesterday to a Latin festival and did notice that there were a number of folks that were out there, probably hundreds, if not thousands, and they were enjoying the music, enjoying some of the food trucks. I think there were about four of them out there, but they were also not necessarily enjoying the heat. And of course, the day before, I had gone down to the closing processional for the National Black, actually called the International Black Theater Festival now, and everything in Winston-Salem got caught in a torrential downpour on the way down there. And I think we might be getting ready to have some bad weather here in another day or two. There might be some rain coming later on this afternoon, but the tropical storm that is hitting Florida now may be heading our way in the next day or two and all along those lines. And of course, I've been watching some of the Olympics, including seeing some sports that I am not all that familiar with, but it is fun learning about them and seeing how amazing the athletes are. I watched a table tennis match. I think it was the gold medal match between the gentleman from China and the gentleman that was from Sweden, and they were going back and forth, and some of those angle shots were truly amazing and all along those lines. And I know we talk about the leaping ability of the basketball players, but I was watching the volleyball match between Brazil and Poland. And when they say that Gabby is no joke, who is one of their stars in Brazil, they are not kidding. Because when I saw her make some of those amazing leaps, I was going like, that's just incredible and all in that space. And I think I saw a shootout in field hockey between India and Great Britain, and might have even watched a little bit of a match that was going on in terms of the cycling race. And I think that came down to a sprint at the end and all along those lines. And of course, there's been some other sports that I caught as well. But definitely it's been fun catching some of the Olympics here and there, even watch some of the gymnast routines and a number of other things. I think maybe even a track race or two. But there's been a lot of folks paying attention to the competitions. But I've got a man that is into the whole space of product management and all along those lines. And maybe he's got some ideas of how they're doing in terms of that with the Olympics and all in that space. So I'm going to bring in David Fraden and see how he's doing in his part of the world and all along those lines. So like I said, it's been hot here. I think we've have in the high 80s, but with a high humidity here in Durham, North Carolina, because I'm literally just around the corner from Duke University. So I'm not sure how the weather is treating you there and everything. But like I said, I think we're expecting 3 or 4 days of rain because of that tropical storm that has been, and actually I think it's now a Category 1 hurricane that's been hitting Florida, and it might be hitting our way as well. So we might get some rain, and that might drop the temperatures down to the low 80s and maybe even the mid 70s. And I, for one, will not be arguing with that because we've had several weeks of very hot weather. So I don't know how it's been in your part of the world, but how have things been going where you are and all along those lines?
Couple of weeks of hot weather. I'm in Silicon Valley near San Jose, California, which is one of the 6, what do they call it, Mediterranean climates of the world. Wow. And our normal weather pattern is we get fog in the morning from the ocean, which is about 54 degrees year round. And the fog comes in because the Central Valley heats up and the air rises. And the nature abhors a vacuum, so the air is brought in from over the ocean, and it's got, of course, the moisture in it, and it goes up over the Santa Cruz hills and becomes visible and blocks out the sun. And usually, back in the 1980s, 1990s, that would burn off for 6 months of the year by about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and we would get temperatures of the high 70s, low 80s, and it never got any hotter than that. But the last previous 2 or 3 weeks, we had temperatures up around 95 to 100.
Wow.
The Central Valley has been going up to as much as 110, 115.
Whoa, that's definitely some hot weather and everything. Were you a native of California, or did you move out there from another part of the country? And what is something that you have loved about being out there, whether you are a native or whether you are a transplanter? Some people call folks from different parts of the world.
I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Moved by a nonprofit student organization to Washington, D.C. and then was hired by the Environmental Balance Association of Minnesota. And Minnesota has two seasons, winter and road construction. And it's uh, sometimes it'd be as cold as 20 degrees below zero. So when you talk to somebody outside, your words would freeze in midair. And then come July, when it warms up, there would be a hell of a rain. Minnesota doesn't have an official state bird. They have an official state insect called the mosquito,
Uh-huh.
and they sell bear traps to catch mosquitoes. So after 4.5 years of freezing to death, I said, "That's it. I want to go to a Mediterranean climate, and I could go here, or I could go to South Africa, Cape Town, or I could go to the western part of Australia or the
Mhm.
Mediterranean, of course." And I picked here, and I've been here since 1980.
Yep. So, as a Minnesota person, are you a Minnesota Vikings fan? Because I'm a diehard Vikings fan myself. I have been ever since the Fran Tarkenton era, and all along those lines. And I actually have a second cousin. Your cousin's daughter is your second cousin, if I remember the cousin tree and everything along those lines. But I know that Annika is big into the Vikings as well, and lately we've been struggling, so we've not had much to root for. But hopefully that will change and everything. But I was just wondering whether you were one of those long term and long suffering Minnesota Vikings fans, because, like I said, I started rooting for them before I went to college in the Midwest at Marquette. So I started rooting for them back in the 70s as a high school kid and a Tarkenton fan, as well as the Purple People Eaters and all along those lines. So were you one of those folks that got caught up in the Minnesota Vikings fandom?
Yeah, I was a fan of the Vikings. When I was there, Fred Tarkenton was the quarterback,
Right.
uh, and I worked on and became the campaign manager for a fellow by the name of Al Quee, Congressman Al Quee, that was a 20-year congressman from the first district of Minnesota, which was in Rochester area down in the south east part of the state, agriculture in nature. And I helped get him elected governor. And one of the endorsements we got was Fran Tarkenton. And then I helped the governor get support for building the old Minnesota Stadium, which I think has now been torn down, and they have a new stadium again 40 years later.
Yeah. What's your take on Minnesota politics now? Because I know right now a lot of people are thinking of Minnesota as a swing state. I know a number of people are concerned because they're trying to figure out who Kamala Harris is going to pick as VP, and they're thinking Josh Shapiro, who is of Jewish background, and actually my dad's girlfriend is of Jewish background as well. But they're hoping that that he may be the pick, even though I've heard some people that are thinking gun control and Mark Kelly might be the pick, and there's some others, including I think the current governor of Minnesota, that have been tossed out there as well. But I'm just wondering because I know that there is a large Muslim population. I have friends that are part of that community as well, and it does seem like they have grown in power in Minnesota. So Minnesota seems like it's a major swing state. So it's one that's been involved in that political framework. What's your take on the future of Minnesota as a political bellwether?
Well, when I was there, Hubert Humphrey was still alive, and I was a member of the Independent Republican Party, which was a moderate party. The Democratic Farmer Labor Party at the time was primarily cronyism. For example, the governor appointed himself senator, and that did not sit well with most Minnesotans. So when he ran for election as a senator, Anderson was his name, he lost that election. And the Lieutenant Governor, Rudy Purpich, moved up from Lieutenant Governor to Governor. And that's the guy I ran against when I ran Al Queen's gubernatorial campaign and beat it by 10 points. Al asked me to take over the campaign with 3 weeks to go. We were 20 points behind in the polls, and I ended up winning by 10 points. And the DFL party there now is the moderate party, like the Independent Republicans used to be, 45 years ago. So, yeah, it's going to be somewhat of a bellwether state, but the population of Minnesota is a little less than 4 million. So it's a much smaller state population wise than Illinois, where Pritzker, the governor there, is under consideration by Kamala, in addition to Josh Shapiro. Mark Kelly, and then I think Pete Buttigieg from Indianapolis is also in the one of the six finalists.
Right. No, there's no doubt about that. What's your take on politics now? Because it sounds like you were involved in politics back there in the 70s and maybe even some in the early 80s. I know when I was in school at Marquette, one of my family friends and a person that's still involved in politics, very much involved in the charter school movement, is Howard Fuller out of Wisconsin and all along those lines. But he was actually how I got to Marquette because of a family connection and the fact that my parents were involved with him on a number of civil rights issues, including I think he was involved with the Allen building takeover, which had to do with black students at that time wanted to get more rights and maybe even more courses over at Duke University. But I just wanted, it seems like it's more of a combative sport than it used to be, politics and everything. So I just wanted your take because it sounds like you were involved in politics for a while. So what is your take on the nature of politics at this particular day and time?
It's disgusting. Personal attacks don't tell you a thing about what the candidate's going to try to do to make my life better. Uh, and I think that's what the MAGA people do. Uh, I am participating now in a texting program to identify or to get out people to register to vote. And 60% of the people that are candidates for registering generally are Democrats. So I'm participating in that texting campaign. And I've sent out about 600 texts over the last week. And I've gotten two or three back from MAGA Republicans, which are viciously nasty.
Hmm.
Uh, and I just ignore them. I mean, it's completely uncalled for. Politics is who gets what in our society. It's not the art of intimidation, as authoritarians tend to do. So I'm hoping that Trump gets beat so bad this time, well, and the movement fails. And a lot of my former fellow Republicans have also either become independents or Democrats and are working hard, like the Lincoln Project, George Conway, and others. There are groups around the country called Republicans for Harris
Hmm.
that are mobilizing, and hundreds of thousands of new volunteers have joined the campaigns to elect Democrats up and down the ballot.
Yep, no doubt about that and everything. So I also want to get into some of your other businesses because I know one of the things that you are very much about is building successful products. I know a lot of times people are wondering about successful products and whether that can be done and what the key is to a successful product. And all along those lines, I was actually just talking to one of my bosses and we were talking about a long time festival that's been going on in Winston-Salem and how one of the things that we are frustrated by is the fact that they haven't done a good job of documenting their success and therefore maintaining the success for future generations and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, what do you think is the key? Because you worked with a number of people, including having been in management with a person that a lot of folks know, which is Steve Jobs and everything. So what is the key, whether it's with a nonprofit, because I did hear you say that you work with some nonprofits as well as for-profits in order to have a successful company, in order to have a successful run? Because even this festival that I was talking about, it's now going on its 18th incarnation, and they do it every 2 years. So this is like either its 36th or 37th year, and hopefully they'll be heading to 40. And I think that the city of Winston said that it has brought like $200 million to that particular city over those last several years and everything, with people coming in, staying at the hotels, spending money at the restaurants, and a number of other things. So, what is the key to having a successful product in your mind?
Well, my experience in politics helped me learn what issues are important for people and then develop policies to help resolve those issues. Uh, and a product manager being the champion of the product, and I prefer the title product success manager, needs to help negotiate and mediate differences between all of the departments of the company so that their product or their service, and the service is nothing more than an intangible product, uh, to be successful. And I've identified in my books and in my courses and training on product management and product marketing five keys to product success. The first thing, though, as a foundation for all of that, is a set of values. that when everyone goes into a room to make a decision about a product, they're all working off of the same set of values. And an organization that not only has a set of values, but also follows those values. And examples of that, of course, is Hewlett Packard, who hired me from Minnesota and moved me to California. They had a set of values, and Apple has a set of values, and they follow them religiously in their decision making and how they treat their customers and how they treat their products and so forth. So the five keys to product success is spelled out in the mnemonic Spice Catalyst, which is the name of my company. It's the five letters of the word spice. S stands for a product market strategy. That's a strategy for the product in the market. Market is a place where you go to buy stuff. Marketing is the act of and the art of getting people to go to that market in order to buy something. So first thing is the product market strategy. The P is processes for product development and for marketing and for product management that can be repeatable so that you grow up the maturity curve. The I is have the information necessary in order to make informed decisions. The C is probably the most important letter, and that's understanding your customer, what it is that the customer does, how they do it, when they do it, where they do it, what's standing in their way, how important is it for them to get it done, and how satisfied is the customer with the current way of doing things. And if you can find 15 things or unmet needs that 15 things that people or companies want to do, where it's very important to get it done, and the current way of doing things is fairly unsatisfactory, then you know you're going to have a successful product. And lastly, the E stands for your employees having amongst them the 130 skill sets required for product success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take a just quick commercial break. And I'm going to turn off that noise that's been in the background there for a little bit so I can hear you even more clear and everything. And then I've got a question I'm going to ask you that may surprise you because it's something that I've had on several of these shows just about the nature of business and everything. But we're going to play about this 2-minute commercial about a nonprofit organization that's based in Virginia and doing a lot of great work with women that are facing various troubles. So just going to play this quick commercial and then I'll be right back as I've got a quick question for you in that regard as we continue our in-depth conversation, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I hope you are as well. So let's just take this quick commercial break.
It is a gem tucked away near a forest, a place where the lost are found. It is a gift of wholeness for those who are ready to receive it. A secret place where peace can be found in stillness, where you can finally stop fighting to survive and just breathe. Just breathe. Where accountability corrects and the word help is not a cuss word. It is the place that was thought of before you ever thought you needed it. It is where forgiveness starts and healing begins. Well, we are taught that when we put our hands to work, we can create some things. As we uprooted the weeds in the garden, it was a reflection of our lives. As we uprooted disappointment, as we uprooted pain, as we uprooted being traumatized. Because God doesn't deal with the surface. He gets to the root of it. We laughed. We shared tears. We shared our stories. We shared our fears, our dreams, our visions, our heart. We were more than just mothers. We were broken women trying to figure out how to become whole again. It became a place where homelessness became hopeless until we reached the bridge of wholeness.
A lot of women were dealing with their problems and all along those lines, and that's what the Natasha House is all about. So glad to be able to play that particular PSA and all along those lines. But the question I had, and this is something that I know a number of people have thought about it in terms of business and everything is I had a guest on. I think he was originally from New York, and he's part of Sri Srinivasan, who is very much into social media and all along that lines, cadre of friends and everything. But the gentleman Ron, and I'm trying to think of Ron's last name, was sometimes shocked at the amount of people that are in business that don't even have a basic business plan or even a knowledge of how to go about business. You mentioned earlier a mission statement, because I know that even the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, we try to know what our mission statement is, and part of the mission statement is about the preservation of African American heritage and even knowing the Black Wall Street area that existed in Durham and a number of other things, and supporting the arts, and that's all incorporated within the mission statement. But I was just wondering, how much do you find that business owners and business individuals in general don't know one their mission statement or their mission kind of purpose and everything, or have a business plan if they are thinking about launching a business of one sort or another?
So prevalent, the lack of a mission statement. And a mission statement is a combination of the values and where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, then you have no idea how to go there. And when you get there, you have no idea that you've gotten there. So mission statement for your product and or for your entire company or your entire service is very important to success. It's kind of interesting. I also do assessments of product management, and I did one for GameStop about 15 years ago. They're located down in just outside of Dallas, Texas, and I interviewed the senior executive management team with a bunch of assessment questions, which, by the way, are on my website if somebody wants to look at those questions. My website is spicecatalyst.com. And when I asked them what their values are, and when I asked them what their mission statement is, each of them gave me a different answer. And that was part of the reason why GameStop, which at that time, I think they had like 7,000 stores around the world where video games were being sold. And there was a transition coming up away from a physical product on CDs or DVDs to online delivery, the way PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo do it now. And they're struggling to deal with that transition, which would basically put their bricks and mortar store obsolete, a lot like what happened to the VHS tape business to Blockbuster. So as a result of lack of agreement on what their mission statement was and what their values were, the company has floundered for a long period of time.
Well, in that same regards and everything, I know that one of the titles of your books is Building Insanely Great Products, as well as organizing and managing insanely great products and everything. How easy is it for the number of people out there thinking that they have the next great idea, just like I know there are a number of people who think they have the next great book and everything along those lines. But how easy is it to come up with a great product and all along those lines? And is it important to have a product if you are a store and all along those lines? Because I know some stores that have created their own lines of coffees or even their own lines of teas or things along those lines. Or is it just perfectly all right to sell those products that already exist and everything? So how important is it to have an insanely great product, and how easy is it to get those insanely great products?
It's very difficult. About 35% of all new products each year fail in the marketplace, primarily because that product market strategy was not put together before the product was sent over to engineering or development. So I talk about in my book, Building Insanely Great Products, those 5 keys to success with lots of examples. And then I have another book out that Wiley published, and it's used in executive product management courses in India at 2 universities there. And it's called Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit. And all of my books, if you just go to Amazon and search for my name, will come up underneath my name as the author. You can pick them up there. And then in order to learn how to put together a product market strategy and how to do innovation, how to understand what it is that your customer wants to do, I have a number of online courses, and also can teach courses online or on demand or in person. I've got a group of instructors that I've trained on my courses around the world. And my number one client is Cisco. And I've trained almost half of all the product managers at Cisco over the past 12 years.
Well, I'm definitely very familiar with Cisco. Actually, I have a friend of mine that does a lot of work with kind of robotics and drone technology and other kind of technology. But he is one of the Cisco engineers, and he's been on this show before and everything. So Cisco definitely has some strong roots here in North Carolina, and particularly the Triangle area of North Carolina. I know that the founders of the network, Nick Palveda and Kim Calhoun, had the pleasure of interviewing a number of executives and those that have been famous. I don't know if they interviewed Steve Jobs. I do know that, as I remember, they interviewed the founder of Netflix and a couple of other people as well and everything. But I was just wondering your experiences, because you've worked with places as diverse as Hewlett Packard and Apple and all along those lines. You've even worked with startups. What is the key to being successful? Like, I'm thinking you've probably talked to a number of folks and you are successful as well yourself. So what do you think the keys are to being a success in business, whether that's somebody like a Steve Jobs or somebody like an Elon Musk, who is a very much successful as well, or somebody, even though we may have other issues with him, as Donald Trump has had some successes in certain businesses, even though he has a number of failed businesses as well. But I just wondering, for those that perceive different people as being successful, what do you see as the keys to success?
Yeah, I think the key there is values. One of the things I found when I was writing Building and Selling Great Products is I went back and looked at the Fortune 500 list, the very first one, which came out in 1965. And I made a table. First column was all those company names. Second column was, did they have values? Third column is, did they follow those values? And I found that almost without exception, those companies that either did not have values and or did not follow values if they had them were out of business. And those companies with values tended to thrive. I then thought that maybe the same thing would apply to my personal career. So I made a list of the 25 organizations I've been affiliated with, both profit and nonprofit, over my career, and 3 columns. Did they have values? Did they follow those values? And did it map it to my personal values? And in those organizations, like at HP and at Apple, I thrived and I was happy. And other organizations where either they didn't follow their values or they didn't have any, I was miserable. And either I got fired, which was like a mercy killing, because the next day I felt better that I didn't have to go back into that environment, or I quit. So I advise people that the first thing you should do is understand what your personal values are, and only go to work for organizations that share those same values.
Yeah, but just in the line and everything, David, that sounds good in theory and everything. But I know a number of people, I mean, I've been guilty of it as well, that had stayed in jobs that they were not happy with because they have to do that whole notion of survival and all along those lines. Because I know there have been a couple of companies that I've worked with that I might not have been that happy, but it was providing a paycheck and all along those lines. And I think that there are probably a number of people that are, even to this day, in jobs that they are not pleased with, but they are afraid to walk away, because if they walk away, they're trying to figure out how they're going to eat and how they're just going to survive. They got kids. I don't have any. I've got my 2 nephews that my brother has, but I don't have any of my own. But they're trying to figure out how they're going to survive. And it's unfortunately, as you know, many of our families, if you are fortunate enough to be married, are 2-income families. And if you lose one of those incomes, you're even in deeper trouble. So what advice would you give people to give them the courage to walk away if it is going to help them in that value conversation?
Well, in their spare time, look for another opportunity, get a job offer, and then quit. So don't quit and then go try to find a job. It's much harder. In my experience here in Silicon Valley, and I don't know what it's like in the rest of the country or the rest of the world, but at least here, every time I changed jobs, I got a 20% increase in pay. So it was quite lucrative to look around. And your name gets out there with recruiters and headhunters, and they start calling you,
Right.
so that you have opportunities placed in front of you. And if your values match up with the new organization, uh, take that job. A friend of mine used to be my property manager for my rental condo in Maui. Came to the Bay Area, and I had lunch with him, and I told the story about values. He went out at an interview a few days later and started talking about values with the hiring manager, and they talked about it for 4 hours. They hired him, and he's extremely happy there. And of course, if you're happy with what you're doing, your chances of getting a raise at that organization is also enhanced.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of races and everything along those lines, I do find that a lot of people are afraid to go ask the boss even after they've been in jobs for those races and everything. So I just wondered from a business standpoint, what advice would you give to people that are maybe lowballing and not necessarily understanding their own worth? Because I do find that a number of people don't understand their own worth, and a number of people won't even attempt to ask for a raise, even though they probably are due a raise. So, what advice would you give to folks in terms of going after those raises?
Immediately after you do something that your boss recognizes as being successful, that's the time to ask for a raise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As soon as they recognize you, then you need to go to them and have them kind of back what they have recognized and all in that place and everything. I don't know. I've seen a lot of people, and it kind of comes back to what we were talking about, even with the economy and everything, that have gone into this gig economy. I've got a number of friends that are in the creative space and work creative jobs, but some of them, because of needing Grubhub or something like that and everything. So, what is your take on the nature of two things? One, the nature of the gig economy, because we do seem to be more in a gig economy based culture and everything, and tied in is we are also very much in a remote space. I know I work for a testing company
Well,
for end of the year testing, and it used to be physically in location, but I'd say over the last 3 or 4 years, most of the assignments that we have got have been using our home computers and is close to 100% remote and everything. So, what is your take on those two trends that seem to be very big now, where a number of people are in somewhat low-paying gig economy jobs because they're not always in just paying jobs and everything, and there are also a lot of people that are doing remote work these days as well.
I've been pretty much on my own with a few exceptions at companies as an independent consultant, which is a gig economy. And what I would do is say hire myself out at $100 an hour, and then when the next offer for a consulting project comes along, I say, okay, I'm at $150 an hour, and I've been able to raise my rates up to $450 an hour, just because I have a limited number of hours in the day and in the week. And you can do the same thing. And I've had my own businesses ever since about 1992 that I've started. Uh, and in some cases, I would have 20 or 30 employees. In other cases, like right now, I just have contractors that contract with to teach my courses.
One of the things I'm curious about is come down to business is a product management conversation because definitely to me a lot of event planners wind up being project managers as well, and I've definitely done event management for a number of years. But one of the conversations I've been having with a lot of people is institutional memory, and it seems like a lot of businesses don't have either knowledge of institutional memory or don't want that institutional memory, even though I think that's an important part of business success. I don't know that Walmart would be as successful as it is if it didn't have some folks there in the company that understood some of the history of Walmart and all along those lines. But that's just my personal opinion. But I was just wondering, what is your take on the importance of institutional memory, and is it something that folks need to have a greater understanding of in whatever the business is? I don't care whether it's a arts business or a nonprofit or a major company like a IBM or a Cisco or any other major company we can think of, even the grocery stores like Kroger's and everything. So, how important do you think it is to have institutional memory?
For success, it's extremely important, especially if the institutional memory is providing success. However, in some companies, they either have the wrong thing as the institutional memory, where senior management says, well, we've always done it this way, and therefore we're not going to do it any other way. And as a result, they lack the flexibility to adjust as the environment changes, the business climate changes, and as the competition changes, and as the technology changes. So you have to have flexibility in your institutional memory to do those things that will work, and not just do those things the same way that it was done before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How important do you think it is to understand your market and everything? Because even here in Durham, North Carolina, and I just went to Winston to visit for the first time in several years, and the downtown areas have changed tremendously. And I sometimes think that the businesses don't always know about the change or understand the change, and they maybe know even appeal to the new people that are coming into the town that might not have been there before. Because I don't care. I know y'all are facing in California and definitely throughout North Carolina. We've faced a number of conversations around newer, younger folks moving in and kind of trying to do that whole gentrification conversation and all along those lines. So, how important do you think it is for businesses to understand the change in the market? Because the markets are ever changing and everything. So, what used to be a popular business at one location may not be as popular now. I think we even see that in the mall situation, because I knew that during the pandemic we saw some malls go into the experience. Well, I think that was before the pandemic, go into the experience businesses because movies were having a hard time, so they became movie theaters that were experiences, and so you could go to the movie and also get a dinner, and it became like an experience versus just going to the old fashioned movie and everything. But then that became costly, so I don't know. I think some of those have already failed and everything. But I just wondered, how important do you think it is to understand the environment that you are in, where whatever that environment is?
Well, it goes back to the C and spice, understanding your customer,
Right.
uh, what it is they want to do, why they want to do it, how they want to do it, and so forth. And the way you accomplish that is you observe first. Observe what people are doing. Um, an example of that is allegedly Henry Ford, the inventor of the low cost automobile,
Right.
went out in his town of Dearborn, Michigan, not far from where I grew up. And he asked people, do you want a car? And they said, no. And he said, well, what do you want? And they said, I want a faster horse. Well, if he had observed the people galloping on their horses through town, hitting them with switches to get them to go faster, he would have said, oh, that's what they want, is a faster horse. And maybe that's why it was called the horseless carriage,
Right.
the first automobiles. Um, so after you do that, then you interview 40 to 80 of your target market. That could be companies, or if you're a business to business, or individuals if you're business to consumer, and you're asking them essentially those same questions. What is it that you want to do? How do you want to do it? Where you want to do it, and so forth. And then on that basis, you get a random sample for a survey, just like the political surveys I used to have done for my political campaigns. And you interview 800, you survey 800 to 1,200 of your target market on those same questions that you worked out the bugs out of in your interviews. And with that in mind, you can then project the size of your market and what it's going to take to reach that particular market. Uh, and then if you're going to have a product line extension or a product line makeover with a new version of the product, you do the same exercise over again. If you're running a restaurant or a shop or a merchant or a grocery store, you do the same thing. You observe, you interview, and you survey. We call those listening posts. So you understand what changes are going on in the market so that you're there ready to accept those changes and deal with those changes as necessary.
It makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely see that as the case and everything. What do you think is the key to having a successful startup? Because I know a number of people, like I said, even here in Durham, I've had quite a few friends that are restaurant owners. Unfortunately, construction and traffic issues have had caused some of them to close down. As a matter of fact, one of our more popular coffee shops, the BU, just recently closed, and part of the issue was the traffic and the newer transportation that was making it easier, less more difficult for people to get to that particular restaurant. And then, like I said, some people were not going to the restaurant in that area because they were at home. So they were probably ordering DoorDash versus going to get the coffee at Dorian's coffee shop. And he still has two of his businesses, but two of them he has had to shut down based on the location and the things that are going in of those locations that he had and everything. So what do you think is the key, whether it's a restaurant or any kind of business, if you're going to be a startup?
Well, if the key is understanding what your customers want to do, and then the data from that survey will tell you about the demographics, the genographics of the generational graphics called genographics of your customers, and you can use that to project what your sales are going to be, and you can also calculate what your costs are. If it's the cost of running the business, you've got labor, you've got food costs, you got energy costs, you got rental costs, utilities, and so forth. And with those numbers calculated from the bottom up, you'll be able to tell your angel investors or your venture capitalists exactly how much profit you're going to make and what kind of return on investment they can expect.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're just guessing as to what that may be. And as a result of that, you may get an investment, and then if you don't accomplish what you went out for that investment, chances are you're going to lose your job. A friend of mine started a company a few years ago. They wanted to go out for a second round of funding. They said they're going to grow 50% a year after year. They grew 20%, which was quite remarkable. But because they had set expectations at 50% per year, all of the founders were fired by the investors and the venture capitalists.
well, how important do you think it is to protect your employees and everything? Because one of the conversations I had with a young lady, I think that was on Saturday and everything, and she's in the restaurant space as well, and I think she's even the head of the hospitality department at one of our local HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities and everything. But she was talking about how that gentleman that I was talking about, the gentleman that had a coffee shop and everything, one of the things that he tried to do was make sure that he placed the employees that they were losing their jobs into new jobs, knowing that he had to shut down and everything. So how important do you think it is to have that kind of relationship with your employees, that you try to protect them, even if you know that you might have to shut your business down or do something along those lines?
Well, I have three things that I do as a manager. One is I ask my employees where do they want to go? What's their goal in life? And I do whatever I can to help them accomplish that goal, whether they stay with me or not. And the reason for that is they know I'm helping them accomplish their life goal, that they're happier and they tend to be more loyal and stay with me. Second thing I ask them to do is just do the best job that you can. And it's okay to make mistakes because we all learn better from making mistakes. And the last thing I ask them to do is be loyal. Don't do what a lot of people do in corporate America, where they cut down others around them in order for them to be able to climb the ladder easier or faster. Well, if you're disloyal to me and the word gets out that I've been criticized on this thing or that thing, then when the time comes, then I try to go to bat for you to get you, for example, a raise or a better position. My credibility has been harmed, and I can't help you as much as if you just tell me to my face what the problem is that you're having, rather than playing politics and cutting me down behind my back.
How much do you think that that is an issue? Because I've heard that said a number of times, and I've tried to stop doing that, even though there have been times that I've been guilty of what I'm getting ready to mention and everything. But there does seem to be in the business community a lot of crabs in the barrel kind of mentality where folks are constantly trying to pull each other down and everything. And I do know that sometimes people can be overly critical of their management and sometimes even do some of those backbiting conversations among their peers and everything along those lines. So I was just wondering how much is that is a problem in corporate America, and as a manager, how do you deal with that? Because I do know that a lot of times people are quicker to go to their friends and coworkers versus actually bringing the grievance to the person that they have the grievance with and everything. So I just wanted your thoughts around that, because I do know that there are a lot of times people are quicker to criticize with their friends and have that crab in the barrel kind of mentality.
Like absolutely. One of the reasons I left corporate America was because of that backbiting uh, that I didn't like at all. And I came into corporate America from politics, running the gubernatorial campaign I mentioned earlier.
Right.
I ran John Conley's presidential campaign in Minnesota. And the politics in those days were very clean. There was no personal attacks like what we see today. What we see today, especially in the MAGA party, is what I used to see in corporate America when I was in corporate America. And I ran away from that set of values as fast as I possibly can because that did not make me happy.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and definitely see that that would be a problem, and everything. Do you find that the same thing happens in the nonprofit world? And what are some of the nonprofits that you have worked with? And what do you think? Because I know a number of times people will see the nonprofits, and I've even on this network we've had people that have been critical of some of the wages that some nonprofits make, and how sometimes the nonprofits are worried about an agenda outside of the agenda that they are advertising. Because I know one of our fellow commentators here talks about the Sierra Club and how they sometimes get involved in issues outside of the issues of nature that the Sierra Club was founded on, and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take on the state of nonprofits and also nonprofit pay and all along those lines, because that is a conversation we've had here on this network just in general. But I'd love to hear your take, because I know you've worked with some nonprofits just like you've worked with some for-profit organizations as well.
I'm association manager by the Chamber of Commerce. And my first nonprofit that I started was the Flying Club at the University of Michigan. And I started them with a set of values and a mission statement. And they're still going strong 54 years after I started. And they've trained over 4,000 pilots. Many of them became airline pilots. The second nonprofit that I started was Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology, and that's the nonprofit I moved to Washington, D.C. And there, I decided to leave after several years because I couldn't be a student anymore. And I had a couple people on my staff that were backbiting. So I said, okay, you can do a better job raising money. Go ahead. And then they went out of business a year or two later after I left. The third organization I started was the Environmental Balance Association of Minnesota, and I spent a little over 4 years developing that and running that. But later, when I became a homeowners association president, I found that that kind of backbiting is now seeped into that area, uh, mainly for people coming in from a corporate America background. And they would make up stuff about other people on the board and other neighbors in order to better themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that and everything, because one of the founders of the network, and he is now in the process of moving to Spain, and right now he's in kind of transitional housing. I think it might be like one of the residence inns or something like that. He and his wife and everything, but he would definitely add one of those kind of condo type apartments or housing situations, and he is not the biggest fan of homeowners. Nick Palveda isn't, because of what you just said. There was a lot of that backbiting that was going on, and he found that to be a nuisance and everything. So he actually left that one and moved to a different place in Durham. And like I said, he's in the process of now moving to Spain, just because he thinks that it is a better cost of living overseas than it is here and everything. And we'll find out if that is the case once he actually makes the move. But when you were saying your grievance against the homeowners association, I hope Nick watches this show in the past, because he's probably going to be like in the amen corner, if I can use that terminology and everything, because he definitely did not have a good experience with homeowners associations in that regards and all along those lines. So like I said, I do hope that because I know he watches a lot of the shows after we're done, so I'm sure he'll be in your amen corner in that space. But why do you think that folks get into that kind of backbiting mindset and everything along those lines? Is it just part of that crab in the barrel mentality that I was talking about earlier, where if I can't make it to the top myself, then I'm gonna make sure that you don't make it to the top? Or what's going on in whether it's the homeowners or even some of these for-profits and nonprofits in your mind?
So it's power. Uh,
Power.
who's going to make the decisions? Uh, I was last president of the Homeowners Association of a condo facility that I lived in for 30 years in Saratoga. And I was president twice, once about 20 years ago, the second time about 7 or 8 years ago. And they had it set up so that every single decision had to be made by the entire board. We only met once a month and did not meet around Christmas time. So there was a huge pileup of decisions that had to be made. We had old growth redwood trees, 1,500 of them, which were in danger of toppling over. And the previous association boards never spent a nickel on large tree maintenance. So I got into the budget $40,000 to provide some tree maintenance to all these trees. And some people didn't like that idea. We had a stream that was filled with algae, and I was able to get it to become 100% organic by putting copper in there and some fish in there and some islands to provide shelter from the sun for the fish in the pond that was eating the algae on the bottom of the pond and the man-made stream. And some people called the islands floating mattresses, even though there was organic, edible flowers growing on the island, and the roots were used were eaten by the fish because it dangled down in the water, and so that's how we fed the fish and improved the environment around that stream. So people always come up with another example. One of the ladies that lived at the complex was a gym instructor, and she wanted to put gym equipment in our clubhouse in one of the rooms for free, and hoping she could get some clients from that, those people that would like to have instruction. But when she was not using it for that purpose, then anyone could use the gym equipment for free. And there was a board member that came along. She says, "Oh, we have to go out for 3 bids on anything that we do." I said, "That is the stupidest thing I ever heard. You're going to go out and see if you're going to get 2 other bids from people to say they're going to do it for free. Why waste our time?" And as a result, that idea was shut down. And all she wanted to do was control the decisions that the board was making, no matter how silly her position was.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My dad actually did something similar. You get a kick out of this. My dad is very much into nature. His dad, my grandfather, was a biologist and everything, but there was and he's had turtles and he had turtle ponds and all along those lines. But there was some overgrowth that some of the neighbors in the neighborhood association were complaining about. So my dad, who can be very much of a smart person and a genius in his own ways and everything, came up with the idea, which they really couldn't argue with, which is he turned it into a nature preserve, because apparently you can get your house and other things declared as a nature preserve. So he declared it as a nature preserve, and that kind of ended that discussion. So definitely was able to maintain that overgrowth. I don't know, because I've not been to his house in a few days now and everything, and I need to see if it's still there, but it was a legitimate nature preserve, and he had it established as such, and that was his way of doing an end around from the neighborhood associations, which can be almost as bad as homeowners associations and all along those lines. But I'm just wondering, on a separate note, in a separate question, what are your thoughts around board development? Because I know a lot of times with boards, whether it's for profits or nonprofits, they want a different representation. Sometimes they want to have a look at representing the various ethnicities that may be in your community. And of course, they want certain jobs. Like most boards I know want an accountant. They want somebody that is able to help you with the numbers. A lot of boards want a lawyer, and there might be other jobs that they want. If it is a medical association, I imagine they want doctors to be on the board as well. But I just wondered, what is your take on board development? Because it does seem like some boards are very much focused on wanting to fit the boxes on who they need for their boards and all along those lines. So as one that's probably served on a number of boards, what is your thoughts around board development?
And it goes back to values.
Right.
Is there a set of values for the organization? Is there a mission statement? And do the board members' values map into that? Right. And my example that I just gave about my previous homeowners association, I tried to get them to adopt a set of values, and the same person that was opposed to the free gym equipment, she said, "Why do we need values?" And then I tried to adopt a mission statement. She says, "Why do we need a mission statement?" Completely missing the point. And the amazing thing is that person had worked at Hewlett Packard. And when I mentioned to her the HP way, which is Hewlett Packard's values, she said she never heard of them.
Oh
Now,
wow.
when I first joined HP, and then later when I joined Apple, we were taking off site the first day in a new employee orientation program. And one of the things we spent an hour doing is having the values of the organization presented to us. And then we would discuss those values and what we believed in and how we would implement them in our day to day work so that we would internalize those values. So that's why I say values of the board maps into the values of the homeowners association or the nonprofit or the for-profit organization, and they have it written down, and everyone agrees to follow those values.
No, that makes a lot of sense. How important do you think it is? Because one of the things that I've served on a number of boards, mostly arts organizations, is this notion of everybody on the board needs to be willing to invest back into the organization. That seems like that's a value, and they do know that not everybody is able to contribute at the same levels. But one of the things I was always told was that if you can't contribute financially, maybe there is a service that you can give that is equal to the value of whatever that contribution by the big donors would be, and all in that space. So how important do you think it is for people that are engaged in organizations to give back to the organization in one form or fashion or another, and particularly those that are engaged in the boards?
I think it's very important. You just can't sit there and make decisions. You got a nonprofit is built upon the strength of each of the individuals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about retreats? Are you a big fan of retreats? Because we just did one at the Hayti Center, which is the cultural arts center that I am part of. Well, the Hayti Heritage Center is the actual building. St. Joseph Historic Foundation is the organization that is the parent company, for lack of a better term, and everything. But how important do you think it is to have these retreats? Because I know I've attended a number of them. Some of them seem to be more effective than others. The one that we did to have some good team building exercises, and I would say that that was one of the better ones. But I've also been to some where you, after you leave, you're going like, I'm not sure that we gained anything, and all along those lines. But I just wondered your take on the importance of retreats in terms of team building.
I think it's very important that you get your board or your team separate away from the day to day tactical things and get together and to get to know each other, to get to share your values, to be able to trust each other so that decisions can be made faster by the organization. When I took over the Apple III product line as the business unit manager, when I was at Apple, and I was at the same management level of the company as Steve Jobs. He was running the Macintosh division at the time. My division was profitable and making money and funding, in part, the Mac development. So one of the first things I did when I started that independent business unit is I asked all of my employees, and I had 17 of them, if we could just go do a 4-day rafting trip on the American River, which is a team building activity, because when you put 7 or 8 people in the same raft, if they're not all pulling in the same direction at the same time, you're going to run into rocks and you're going to flip over and going to go swimming in this cold rushing water and so forth. So, and then we, camped out at night. When I was running the Environmental Balance Association, they invited me to go on an executive outward bound course, and went up there and woke us up at 6:30 in the morning up at the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota. And they said, "Oh, let's all take a little walk." So we started walking down a road, and then the head guy that was leading the group, who was an employee of Outward Bound, started walking out into a peat bog, and I had just bought brand new gym shoes. I didn't want to get them dirty, so I would jump from peat bog to peat bog. I wouldn't walk through the mucky peat, and pretty soon everybody was up to their chest except me in peat moss, and the chief instructor leader didn't like the idea that I was different and I was standing on top of a peat bog and I was not dirty. So he started splashing me with peat. And one thing you don't do is, I went to summer school swimming every summer for like 10 years growing up, and I never lost a splash fight. And when I was done with this guy, he had peat coming out of his ears, coming out of his nose, spitting it out of his mouth. His eyes were covered, and he is completely filthy. And I found out later the whole purpose of that exercise was to level the playing field for everybody in the group so that they could work together by changing their appearance to no matter what clothes they were wearing, they all were covered with this mud. So that's one of the things that that Outward Bound does in order to tame people into working as a team. Yeah. So that's why I did the same kind of thing with my Apple III team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that sounds like a strong way to bond and everything. You just mentioned up something else that we talked about on this network. Some are fans of it, some are not fans of it and everything. I personally am one because I do think that there are things that have not been leveled business-wise and everything. But I was just wondering, how important do you think it is to level playing fields? Because you just used that term, and I know that has definitely been a conversation that's been had even with certain minority groups, with the media and other things as well. But I do know some people that are not DEI fans that will say that the field is already leveled and we don't have to level the playing field and all in that space. So I just wanted your take on leveling the playing field. And also I know that there's some people on the network that are youth advocates and all in that space. So do you think that businesses, so it's actually a two-part question. One, your thoughts about leveling the playing field. And do you think that businesses are doing enough to address the youth in their organization? And should they do that? Because I know that sometimes organizations, even political organizations, will give the old heads a lot of voice and not really hear the voice of the youth. But I just wanted your take on both of those.
Yeah, I think the playing field is very important. I'm Jewish, and I remember visiting my dad's family in Washington, D.C., and his older brother was the librarian for the Navy at the Pentagon. And I'll vividly remember him and my dad talking, this would be in the late 50s, wondering if, as a result of the rise of civil rights, that less pressure would be put on the anti-Semitism against Jews. And for a while there, Jews and blacks collaborated on civil rights. So I follow the values of the Torah, which is really not a Bible. It's a list of thou shalls and thou shalt nots, sort of a set of values for the Jewish race. Some of those were passed down, but not all of them, into Catholicism. And some of them are not followed anymore by certain people. So that DEI, I'm very strongly supportive of. I think some sort of compensation to those entities like blacks that were denied mortgages, which has been a major source of financial growth and reducement of poverty in our country and around the world. That should all be done to level the playing field, because I don't believe anybody is unequal to anybody else. All men are created equal, as the Declaration of Independence says.
Yep, definitely agree with you. What about the notion of us listening to our youth, even in the sense of business and everything? Because I do know that even in business sometimes, and even in organizations, sometimes there is folks that are young that feel that they're being ignored. But I also know that sometimes the older folks feel that sometimes the young folks are not listening to their wisdom. So it does seem like there's sometimes be generational divide.
Well, when I started the FAST organization, I was 19 at the time, and by my end of my sophomore year in college, I had testified before the U.S. House of Representatives in support of the supersonic transport, and went to meetings in my pink polyester suit at the White House. So I had 15,000 members of the FAST organization, and Congress was ready and willing to listen to what we thought. I also later lobbied Congress to get the American space shuttle built, and I was successful on that. And I also lobbied Congress for Project Independence to reduce our dependence on Middle East oil and oil in general, and testified on alternative energy on the Project Independence hearings, including the notion of putting solar panels on everybody's roofs to decentralize energy production, and likewise windmills. And here we are over 50 years later, and as a society, with the Inflation Reduction Act, is finally getting that done. Where I think here in the state of California, about 50% of our electric production is hydro, geothermal, solar, and wind. And we're about to put, I think, about 10 gigawatts of offshore wind power along the California coast.
Oh wow, that's going to be tremendous to see how that works out and all along those lines. So that's just fascinating that y'all are doing that. Got a few more minutes to go in this fascinating conversation. I've been thoroughly enjoying it and everything. But one question I had to ask you, coming back to politics and everything, is if you were to give advice and maybe you got a idea as to whether it should be Shapiro or Mark Kelly. I personally am thinking it was going to be Mark Kelly because of the Gabby Gifford and the gun control and some of the other things that he brings to the table from Arizona, but I could be wrong. It could be that gentleman that you mentioned from Minnesota. But if you were to give from a marketing standpoint, because part of your background is also marketing advice to Kamala, she tries to become the first Black Indian woman to get elected and all along those lines, and the first woman just in general. What advice would you give her from a marketing standpoint?
Stick to the issues, talk about the future, which is what she's doing. Um, Correct the lies that Trump and MAGA is putting out there. For example, they call her the border czar. She was never appointed the border czar. Her job was to work with Central America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and one other country down there, which had tremendous amounts of social unrest, gangs running freely, threatening people's lives. I'm the grandson of an immigrant from Ukraine, and my grandfather was a blacksmith for the governor of Kiev, and he maintained the 200 or so horses for the governor. And the governor came to him in 1914 and said, "Get out of the country. Here's $250 and leave. Otherwise, I'll kill you." Because there was six pogroms, the other name for Holocaust, that had occurred over the previous 100 to 150 years at the hands of the Russian Cossacks. So he left the country, and it's been immigration that has helped this country. In fact, some economists are saying now that the immigrants that are coming here, in addition to filling jobs that Americans don't want to do, like farming, they are also paying taxes. I think they're paying over $100 billion a year in taxes. And that's one of the reasons why our economy is so strong. And there are cities in the Midwest that are trying to attract immigrants because a lot of the people that live in these little cities have left or have died. So Japan is an example at the other end of the spectrum where they opposed any kind of immigration. And now they've got such an aged population, there's not enough people to take care of them. And they've had their interest rates at, I think, 0.05% for the last several years. And the stock market downturn today, August 5th, 2024, has been attributed in part to the fact that Japan raised their interest rates and worries about the jobs and the economy in the United States. At the same time, while immigration has gone way down, and they're not here to take our jobs. They're not here to take our black jobs, whatever a black job is. And they're not rapists and killers, as Trump and MAGA have said. They're a boon to the economy.
Agree with you on that and everything. What's your take? Because I didn't know about the Ukrainian background. We actually have a gentleman, Sasha Star, that has a show about Ukraine, Russia, and China that we do every Tuesday and Friday. But just as a Ukrainian descent, what is your take on that particular war and all along those lines? And do you think that there will ever have an ending on that war? And Secondly, what is your take, as you did mention being of the Jewish background, on what's going on in Israel, and will we ever see peace in that world, and is a two-state solution even possible?
Well, in the case of Ukraine, I wish the world would allow Ukraine to use the military assets that we've given them to attack military targets in Russia. Right now, Russia has thousands of these glide bombs, somewhat um, aimable, and they're dropping hundreds of them on the population and on the front lines, and that's why Ukraine is on the defense mostly up until this point in time. But Ukraine is now in the process of manufacturing over 1 million drones per year, and they're using them to attack, even at long distances, aircraft that are dropping those bombs. With our F-16s now finally getting into Ukraine, they should be free to attack the airfields and shut down the Air Force, the Russian Air Force there. So they can't be dropping those bombs on energy facilities and on apartments and on schools and on shopping centers and so forth, as they've been doing over the past 2.5 years. With regard to Palestinian-Israeli situation, I'm a very strong supporter of a two-state solution that Thomas Friedman, the columnist for the New York Times, has laid out what should happen there. Israel should normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia, which is the whole reason why Iran has encouraged Hamas to attack, was to blow up that relationship. Netanyahu has to go, and a more moderate government in Israel needs to be installed. And the Palestinian Authority needs to be crooks in there need to be removed. New leaders need to be trained. Their police force needs to be enhanced, and they should be the ones to take over the government of Gaza. And if that's done, we can that would marginalize Iran and return peace to the Middle East and enable the Palestinians to profit, just like the Israelis have been able to do since the founding of Israel 75 years ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely see that as a reasonable solution. And along those lines, I have a lighthearted question to ask, sports related, but before I get to that one, and then there's a question I ask everybody and everything along those lines. But one of the things that we talk about on this network regularly, in particular on this show and on some of the other shows that I host, is this whole notion of the imposter syndrome. And I've been listening to you. You seem very devote in your convictions, and that is a wonderful thing, and all along those lines. But for those that are less able to be maneuvered or manipulated, for lack of a better term, what advice do you give to folks to get past that imposter syndrome? A lot of people that are their worst critics. That whole self-critic thing is a very real thing, as I know you know in the business world and everything. I'm sure there were people, probably even people, that told you when you wanted to write these 3 books that you should never write a book, and particularly a book that is more academic in nature and everything. And I'm sure there are probably folks that told you that, and I'm sure that sometimes even your own inner voice might have been telling you the things that you didn't need to do business wise as well. So how do you deal with both the outer critic and the inner critic? Because I know that both of those can be problematic. I'm in my early 60s and still in that single space, and I know that I sometimes have conversations with myself about both business opportunities but relationship opportunities as well. So how do you deal with both that inner and that outer critic?
Well, one thing we study Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the fundamental base level, it's food, clothing, and shelter.
Right.
And then as you move up, it becomes more esoterical and more achieving. And figure out where you are in that hierarchy of needs, and figure out what things you need to do in order to move up to the top of that. Second thing is that I have a need to be wanted and accepted, and I have a need to accomplish things. So I like to get things done each day. So I make a list of things that need to be done, and then I get joy when I'm able to cross them off the list.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's good advice for everybody. Because even before we started the show, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, because I know sometimes people talk themselves out of situations, because I know that because of being a mass transit person, meaning I get around from mass transit. I sometimes don't even bring myself into conversations because I'm afraid that people will make a judgment based on that. And then I was also saying that the flip side of that is being part of a legacy family. People can make a judgment on the opposite side. So in one case, they may be making a judgment that I am less than, and in the other case, they may be making a judgment that I am more than, because my family is somewhat known in this area. Mom ran for Secretary of State and did a number of achievements, as did my grandparents, and all along those lines. So it's interesting how sometimes those that can be part of the interesting conversation as well, because we can sometimes set standards and have standards set for us as well. But I just wanted your take on that, because definitely that is a conversation I know many people have, is this notion of being overly critical of themselves, even in business. So I was wondering, when you talk to business owners and they're thinking about even starting a startup, how do you get them out of their own head? Because that can be one of the worst things that we do in business, is staying in our head to stop us from doing the things that we should be doing.
Well, typically that's preceded by an assumption,
Right.
and you got to test whether or not that assumption is correct
Right.
before you start what I call negotiating with yourself.
Right.
Like, I have friends that need money, want to make money, and I say, well, why don't you go do this kind of a job, or why don't you go on that kind of an interview? And they immediately say, oh, well, they only hire people that have a college education, or they only hire people that have master's degree or something like that. Well, that's an assumption that you need to go out in reality and prove whether it's true or not.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're right. People make assumptions. I actually ran into a gentleman, ironically, from California. I think he heads the California Black Chamber of Commerce, but also runs the group Jay King. I mean, Jay King is the guy's name, but I ran into him in Winston-Salem about 2 days ago. And that's part of what he was talking about, because he's talking about how a lot of times when people are when he's going to people and wanting them to get involved in investment projects and in investment ventures, a lot of times they are afraid to admit that they don't have the money to invest in everything, because they are too proud to admit to where they are and all along those lines. Because sometimes it's not that they can't invest because they don't want to, but it's because they don't have the resources to. But that pride thing gets in the way, so they'll find another excuse as to why they're not investing, versus just admitting that they don't have the money to invest in the first place and everything. So I just wanted your take on that, because a lot of people will be very proud about their financial picture, and they will try to give you the impression that they have more than they have, but don't want to admit that they don't have those nickels that you're asking them for, which is kind of what the point that Jay was making, is that just go ahead, and if you ain't got it, say you ain't got it, or maybe find a way to get together with others that are in similar situations and create all of you having it together, kind of that building a pot together kind of theory and everything. So I just wanted your take on that.
I agree with that. You got to challenge your assumptions, because nobody else will.
Right. Yeah, and definitely that's what a lot of times we don't do, is we don't challenge those assumptions. So that's very interesting. The question I was going to ask you, that I ask all my guests, and I'll get to that one last, but I did have the sports question, because I did see the San Francisco 49ers shirt, and I have one of my brother's friends that's very much of a 49ers fan, and we were talking about the Vikings earlier, but my brother's good friend is a good friend of mine, Al. I don't think he's ever lived in San Francisco that I'm aware of, but he is a diehard 49ers fan. So as one that is into both real football as well as fantasy football, my lighthearted question to ask you is, what San Francisco players do I need to draft this year, if any, and everything, and how is the 49ers going to do this year? Because I think I've got either the 7th or the 8th pick. I'm somewhere in like the middle of the pack and everything. And, you know, they do that whole round robin, which means I'll have like the 8th and the 34th pick or something like that.
Guthrie, the running back that came from North Carolina, you should get Brock Purdy, a quarterback.
Okay.
You should get Debo Samuels, Ayuk. Those are wide receivers. You should get George Kittle, who's the tight end. You should get Nick Bosa, who's a defensive end. You should get Fred Warner, who's the middle linebacker. Let me just think if there's anybody else. You should get Jake Moody, the kicker. You should get Ronnie Bell, who's a wide receiver. The last two folks went to the University of Michigan, so I'm a little bit biased towards them.
Yeah, definitely biased and everything. But yeah, those are some great players. I think I did have Kittle one year. Either I had him or my brother did, and he did get a number of points and everything. I think Minnesota's still trying to figure out who their quarterback's going to be. So I have no clue what Minnesota players I'll get, if any, because I know they said Kirk Cousins is gone and they have that kid that they just drafted, but they got to wait a year or two till he can fit into the system. But who knows? He might be like that kid from Chicago and come in and make it as the starter before the end of the season and all along those lines. So we'll see what players I get, because I think our draft is at the end of this month or at the beginning of September of the 2 days. So I've got 4 weeks to do some research.
J.J. McCarthy was a quarterback at Michigan
Right.
that won the national championship, and the Vikings drafted him. And then our previous backup quarterback will probably be the Vikings starting quarterback, Sam Darnold.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sam Darnold is a good quarterback, and all along those lines and everything. One of the things I do on this show, and that's where I was going to go with, and everything, is we get ready to wind down in another 5-10 minutes. But this has been a great conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. You've given a lot of great insights as I try to give all my guests, because we are part of an international network, to give their message of positivity, as well as any thoughts that they've got as to how they can be reached and contacted, and definitely a message of positivity for the global community, not just for the U.S. community, and all in that space. Because as we always at times talk about on our news show, matter of fact, today was ridiculous because it was like 8 different unrest, including Bangladesh and England and a number of other places. So the world does seem to be in various turmoil. So what advice would you give to folks as they're dealing with all of these various issues in a message of positivity? Because one of the things that I consider almost like a personal mission is to try to spread as much positivity as we can in order to keep the world as positive as we can as well. So any message of positivity that you would share with our global audience? Vote. That is very much important. I agree with you on that and everything. So definitely got to get out there and vote. What do you say to people that say that this is one of the most important elections? You talked about values earlier, and I'm hearing people that are saying that this is an election that comes down to that whole question of whose values do you treasure the most and everything. So do you agree with folks on that? Because I'm hearing people say that this is one of the most important elections, but then I'm also hearing people say that no matter who wins, they won't necessarily leave the country. But I've heard other people say that if the wrong party wins, they're out, meaning out of this country and all in that space. So how important do you think this particular election is from a perspective of where society is?
People get out to vote, and they vote their values, things like freedom, support of trying to stop climate change that we were talking about earlier in terms of the temperatures, not only here but around the world, versus you can't believe anything that comes out of that guy's mouth. It sort of reminds me of that joke about attorneys. How can you tell when an attorney lies? Their lips move. And why they believe anything that guy says, given the tens of thousands of lies that he's told over the past 8 years publicly, including lying about his successful business career. It's a big choice. I think Barack Obama used to say that Trump's values, that's not American values. That's not our values. That's not us. So it's absolutely critical. And if now that Kristen Sinema, the senator from Arizona, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, neither of them are running for re-election. Those are the two that primarily block the filibuster rules from being changed. If the Democrats, before the next session of Congress, control the Senate and change the filibuster rules to at least make a member to have to stand and talk for hours on end, like it used to be before, or make it even easier to get legislation passed on the basis of a majority, simple majority, 51 votes versus 60 or 66. Then if we take control, Democrats take control of the House again, some very remarkable things can be accomplished. Restoring Roe versus Wade, restoring the freedom of women to control their own bodies. And like Kamala Harris asked, and she was interviewing, what's his name, for the Supreme Court, can you name any laws where men control decisions about men's bodies? And of course, the answer is no. There's no law that exists that does that.
Yeah.
But there's a law allowing men to control women's decisions about their own body. We could get Supreme Court reform so that the stacked Supreme Court would become more fair, not only in terms of the three proposals that Biden put forth, limiting term limits and an enforceable code of ethics. It's the only court in the land that has no enforceable code of ethics. And I'm very much in support of another thing, and that is expand the size of the Supreme Court so the influence of those six conservatives, including, it came out today that Thomas took a free trip in 2010 from Hawaii, I think, to New Zealand at some conservative contributors' expense, and he hasn't disclosed that before. The guy's gotten over $4 million in gifts since he got on the Supreme Court, much of which he never disclosed. And there's no enforcement of ethics for him to give that back, or at least even to disclose it in a timely fashion. So a lot of those kinds of things can be passed by Congress and signed into law by President Harris if people get out to vote and vote Democrat up and down the lines, including, for example, getting more Democratic legislatures elected. I think 26 states now have a Republican majority, reducing that number. And Common Cause has done something to help modify the Electoral College, which rewards states that have smaller population and penalizes states like mine in California, where we've got 50 million people, that they've gotten 47 states to agree that whatever the national popular vote is, that's the way that they will vote all of their delegates to the Electoral College. If we can get 3 more states to pass that and get it up to 270, then it'll be possible that the Electoral College will then follow what the popular vote votes for on a national basis and not give undue influence to the smaller states.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Last question, just really quickly, as a side question before I get ready to hit the outro video, which is that same intro video and everything. But what is your take? Because one of the big issues that people have been talking about, particularly, and it impacts California, we're actually talking about it earlier because I think the next Olympics will be in Los Angeles and everything. But what do you think the solution is from a national level? Because we even have this issue here in North Carolina as well with our growing homeless population and dealing with the homeless and the increase in rents that are going on all over the place as well. So I just wanted your take on what we can do as a country around the homeless population, because I've heard some very high figures coming out of California.
Yeah, two major problems that cause homelessness. One is the increasing gap between income and the cost of housing. So in addition to the billions of dollars, we just, I think we approved a statewide bond issue for homelessness. And we're about to vote on a Bay Area bond for homeless housing. Another thing I think should be done is mental health counseling and support and social support. One thing that's been very successful in LA and in Canada and in Stockton, California, is giving people money on a regular basis for several months or several years, which enables them to move into housing. There are people in Southern California that they were given money and they were given housing, and 6 to 9 months later, they've been able to find a job and have been able to move into housing away from that kind of public housing. Another thing I think should be done is interest rates for mortgages should be dropped considerably, because at the 7, 8, 9% interest rate that we're at today, that will pushes people outside of being able to get a loan to buy a house. It reduces the number of homes that are built because the developers can't get their money back by selling those properties. So those are several things.
Yeah, those sound like some great proposals and some great ideas and everything. I'm going to give you the full screen and everything as we get ready to go out. And all along those lines, we've got some other great programs, including the All Around Show that'll be here with Dr. Anthony. And that's talking around a number of things with education at around 6 o'clock and everything. And then we've also got Maxine Phillips that has a business related show and everything. And of course, K. Pasa Mohair, which was on yesterday, deals with Latin culture, but we oftentimes re air those shows as well. And so see was all that background earlier and all in that space because we also like to advertise the shows even during our interviews as well and everything. But I'm going to turn it over to the full screen. And if you want to just share your thoughts before we end about anything that you've got in mind that you haven't got to and how people can reach you and all along those lines. But I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And hopefully I can get you to come back on this show or some of our other shows in the near future because you've given some great insights, including some political insights and some business insights. So I'll turn over the full screen and if you have whatever parting thoughts and closing things that you want to say, including how folks can reach you and your website once again as well.
Yeah, people could go to my website, spicecatalysts1word.com, get my contact information. You can email me at dave@spicecatalyst.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. On the website, you can learn about my books. You can learn about my courses that are available on demand through Udemy. And then lastly, I'm about to release a new book called Letters from My Jaime. It's a bit of a biographical history of my grandfather and my father from Ukraine in the late 1800s through World War II and up until the 1970s. And it's based upon a series of letters that my dad wrote home during World War II. They're very, very funny and gives you a humorous personal account of that period of American and world history.
Well, I greatly appreciate it. Like I said, and on that note, we'll get ready to get out of here with the video. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that I'll be able to get you back on. Glad I found you through Matchmaker, because there are a couple of different avenues like Matchmaker and podcast guests and others that I find great guests. But I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully I can get you back on this show, as maybe even our new show and some of our other ones as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to seeing you back in the not too distant future on another one of our shows here on Pod TV as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you gave some great insights and a lot of powerful knowledge. I hope folks will go back and watch the show in the reruns, and of course, usually about a day or two later, we put them on the audio platforms as well. So they always air to Roku and Twitch and a number of other places while we're going live, including Facebook, and then later we go to the audio platforms when I put them up, and then through Spreaker they go to TuneIn, Stitcher, and a number of the other audio platforms, so they'll be able to hear the audio version if they don't want to see our mugs in the screen and all along those lines. So I definitely enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing you in some other ones in the near future.
Thanks for putting up with me.
Thank you. No problem.